On yesterday's stream, as I was trying to broadcast news stories, I heard some shaking of my building. At first, I thought, wow, this is pretty late. It's past military curfew time. So I don't think there's anybody else in my Kiev bunker studio. I mean, if this was like, I don't know, 6 or 7 a.m. past time of curfew, it would make sense, but that can't be the case. And so I took out an earbud, I listened, and I waited until there was another shake. When I heard another shake, I realized that the city was under air attack. I double checked the air raid alert, and I confirmed my suspicions that what I was listening to was explosions around the city that were close enough to me that the area was, well, the building was shaking to a small degree, not a heavy degree, but a small degree. And what I was hearing was the upper floors of the building that I am in shaking. Not down here in the bunker. Again, I am underground. And that's what I appreciate about the Kiev Bunker Studios, that we can continue to broadcast through these air attacks, give you updates about these air attacks, keep you guys informed at home. But in that moment, the fact that I could hear that and I could hear multiple, I had a feeling that it was bad. Now, there was already an air attack during the day that did kill somebody and wounded a bunch of other people, and it was quite large. It was an air attack of roughly 800 drones, nearly 1,000 drones during the daytime. And then during that nighttime drone attack, there was another 600 drones along with Kinzhal missiles and other missiles that were thrown at Ukraine. Now, when you calculate altogether what that means, we're talking about a mass drone attack throughout a 24-hour period of about 1,500 drones thrown at Ukraine. That is record setting. But to put that into perspective about how record setting that is more drones in one day than had been launched by the Russians throughout the entirety of 2022 and 2023 combined. So that's quite a lot of drones. Now, whether that is the Russians saved up a bunch of drones to do one mass attack, or is an indication of a spike in their production capacity, I don't think that they've spiked in production capacity to make that the type of thing that they can do every day. Of course not. And of course, that comes with some saving up of drones. But the Russians, just like the Ukrainians, have been able to increase the amount of drones that they can throw at Ukraine over time, and this is the natural result of it. I said last year that I thought that we were going to see 1,000+ drone attack by the end of 2025. That did not actually end up happening by the end of 2025, but that has happened going into 2026, and it has passed it by a mile. It has done another 50% on top of that number. So that is quite a massive drone attack, and I have not seen many headlines about it. I mean, it's a record-setting drone attack. It's more drones thrown at Ukraine than Ukraine saw for 2 years in a single night and day, a single 24-hour period. And it's not a big headline on CNN. It's not a big headline on CBS, PBS, Fox, MSNBC, like whatever outlet you're thinking of, from The Onion to the Babylon Bee. It was not a headline, which is quite frustrating to me. I think that type of record-breaking attack, especially considering it killed at least a dozen people, and it also killed a little girl, and there are still people missing, buried under the rubble. I'd have to double check the reporting, but last time I checked, there were 17 people missing, but that was at 4 p.m. As of today. Well, last night Ukraine time, today American time, Yankee time. But still, it was a devastating attack for civilians. A 12-year-old little girl was killed, and a building, as you can see on screen right now, this building taken by this picture taken by Nick Allard, a building was destroyed, completely collapsed from a missile strike. A drone alone is not going to do this. This was a missile. Now, this is horrific. This is disgusting, but this is not new behavior for the Russians. This is repeated behavior by the Russians. It is merely scaled up behavior from the Russians. So that's the first thing about this air attack. The second thing about this air attack is the Ukrainians can get overwhelmed. The Ukrainians have layered their air defense system with, anti-ballistic missile air defense. They have some Patriots still. They have other missile air defense systems. They also have the, Ukrainian anti-drone cowboys, as we refer to them in our documentary, the anti-shed cowboys, that have machine guns in the back of pickup trucks to help try to shoot down these drones. They've got anti-drone helicopters that fly around. They've got anti-drone rotary craft that fly around. They have anti-drone other type of aircraft, other type of planes that fly around. Sometimes even cargo planes they got guns sticking out of the side. They've got anti-drone drones that are intercepting these drones. But ultimately, if you throw 1,500 drones at a country combined with missiles within a 24-hour time period, especially as the United States support when it comes to Patriot interceptors has decreased, you're going to run into problems. You're going to run into clear problems, and that problem was most brutally shown through the death of a 12-year-old girl. So this is quite devastating. This is quite horrific. But this is also a sign of the ever-escalating drone war between the Ukrainians and the Russians. The Ukrainians have also broke record after record after record for their drone attacks on Russia. Now, have they ever done something to this size? 1,500 drones thrown in a single night? No. But we have seen the drone attacks that the Ukrainians have been able to carry out increase from 1 or 2 or 3 drones to a dozen drones, to a couple dozen drones, to over 100 drones, to going near 200 drones, to going towards the hundreds of drones. Now we're seeing that continue to expand. And the target selection from what the Ukrainians are targeting and what the Russians are targeting can be quite different. Where the Russians seem to be continuously throwing their drones at urban center after urban center, sometimes targeting military factories, sometimes targeting power stations, sometimes, when I talk about some of these missile strikes, it seems to show them targeting the civilian infrastructure. We saw that with the children's cancer ward that was bombed by a KH-22 missile. We've seen tons of civilian infrastructure and buildings, residential apartment buildings, getting struck by Shahed drones. Now, all of these were not done deliberately, even though when you talk about a KH-22 slamming into a cancer ward, it's very hard to argue that they didn't have to enter in subcoordinate. But there is a certain amount of, this drone after circling ran out of fuel and then rammed into a building. But if the Russians don't care enough to do anything about it and are also engaging in mass attacks on Ukrainian cities and urban infrastructure that often do this while denying it, then there's not really much, I guess, credit or relief you can give to the Russians when it comes to this type of critique. In fact, if you were to look into how the Russians were talking about this on social media, on Telegram, the general theme of what this attack was, oh, it's fake. This isn't a real attack. This is it was a real attack, but the damage done to this building, the collapsed building, the families buried in their own home, that's fake. That isn't real. You can see that right here. Russian Z propagandist channels are calling the strike on residential buildings in Kiev, which killed civilians, a fake. In Kiev, they cleverly staged a show with the destruction of a residential building by a missile, presumably having pre-mined this very building with industrial explosives. Technically and substantively, the photo literally repeats the footage of 2022, which was actively pushed into all Western media, screaming about the horrific Russian missile attacks. Then came the fabricated declarations about Bucha and everything else. So it's just essentially like, everything was faked. Russia's never done anything wrong. Everything is correct. Everything is XYZ. It was all, of course, Russia's gift and Ukraine's fault. The caricatural and inferior freak who calls himself the Ukrainian president, will soon be scrambling in an attempt to conduct an anti-crisis after the start of criminal prosecution of Yarmak and the emergence of compromising information where the green parasite is not directly named yet. We suggest that as part of the anti-crisis and shifting focus of the world community, the Kaminsky nuclear power plant could be blown up. Okay, now, let me throw out there, how many of Putin's inner circle are being charged with corruption and are serving jail time, are going to be thrown behind bars? I can't think of any that are still in the president of Russia's favor. Yarmak should still be within Zelensky's favor, and we're hearing everything. We're hearing all the details about his case. We're hearing not only the corruption allegations, but about the fact that he was making high-profile decisions about leadership and, the Zelensky's cabinet due to the commentary from a fortune teller. I mean, we were literally a tiptoe away from tarot cards and crystals deciding, really important national decisions. I don't know how you could see the fact that accountability exists with the independent agencies of NAPU and SAPU, and that is something you critique Ukraine over. But that's always the problem with flushing out corruption, especially during this type of crisis. Flushing out corruption, reporting on corruption, jailing people over it, investigations being launched. This is naturally how you take on corruption and evolve your society over time, making it less corrupt, making our politicians more accountable, and making it so that they don't feel that they have the leniency to steal from the Ukrainian people. But to the Russians, it's a sign of weakness. It's also a sign of weakness for the worst commentators in the West. But ultimately, I think the fact that NABU and SAPU retained its independence despite pressure from Zelensky's office is ultimately what it leads to this. What leads to Yarmak being held accountable, and now leads to the Russians saying this is all a diversion tactic. Anyway, this type of air attack will likely happen again. I was going to say possibly happen again, but saying possibly happen again would be underselling it. It will likely happen again. And the Ukrainians will attempt to intercept those drones. They will attempt to intercept those missiles, but the likelihood of more penetrating and getting through is still highly likely. Second, I want to throw something at you guys, and that is this story. Zelensky instructs military to prepare response to Russia's deadly Kiev attack. President Volodymyr Zelensky on May 14th said he had instructed Ukraine's military to prepare possible formats for our response to a deadly Russian missile and drone strike on Kiev that killed at least 16 people and injured at least 47 others. So the number I was talking about was over 10. The number now is 16. Explosions from dozens of missiles and hundreds of drones rocked Kiev overnight as Russia's latest mass attack on Ukraine's partially destroyed a large apartment building. Among the victims killed were 2 children, including a 12-year-old child, according to the state emergency services. It reported 47 others wounded as of 4:30 p.m. local time. Now, 29 Kh-101 cruise missiles, 12 Iskander S-400 missiles, which is supposed to be air defense, by the way. Part of the reason why those are so inaccurate is because they're not designed for these types of strikes. And 652 of the drones were shot down or jammed before reaching the target. President Volodymyr Zelensky said, citing a preliminary report, that a Kh-101 missile that struck a building in Kiev was manufactured in the second quarter of this year, stressing that Russia is still able to import the components, resources, and equipment needed for missile production despite sanctions, and the amount of Western components you can find in these weapons will make your stomach churn. We are preparing steps that can intensify our joint response. Sanctions must be more painful for Russia, Zelensky said on his telegram. Now, when he says sanctions must be more painful, most of you maybe think like economic sanctions as the idea that, we're going to work with Western allies to try to target the Shadow Fleet with sanctions, or we're going to try to target like third parties that purchase Russian energy product, or we're going to target the Western military companies that funnel their components through third parties like Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, or Uzbekistan in order to get weapons or at least the internal components for weapons into Russia, which then are manufactured into Russian weapon systems and then launched in Ukraine. And you don't really need a deep investigation to find out this is happening. All you need to do is crack open some of the Russian weapon systems that have been launched at Ukraine, and you can find these components. You can find components from some of the wealthiest and most influential Western companies in the United States. And this is also why I think it would make sense for those who want to strangle the Russian war machine to first, before anything, go after those you have the most policy power to actually legislate, and that is the Western military companies, or not really military companies, but you could say electronics companies, those making high-profile computer chips, and target them with regulation. Target them to either make them self-regulate or implement those regulations after they have clearly failed to self-regulate after nearly 5 years. So this is quite a devastating attack, but when Zelensky talks about the counter response, the sanctions, it's not those types of things. It is long-range strikes. Zelensky has this pattern of calling long-range strikes by the Ukrainians into Russia long-range sanctions is the way he describes it. I think, number one, it's because he's being cheeky. It's fun for him to say, long-range sanctions. But number two, it isn't just about long-range sanctions. It's also about, we want to go after, like, the cheekiness of it. It's also, we want to emphasize the fact that we're undermining the Russian war machine. We're going after the military factories. We're going after the oil and gas industry that funds it. We're going after the mechanisms that support the Russian war effort. And so that's another reason why he calls them long-range sanctions. So I don't know when this long-range sanction program by the Ukrainians is going to be launched, but I am waiting with bated breath for the Ukrainian response and then the Russian counter-response once more. But this is just one example of the type of daily horrors that Ukraine as a nation has to face, with its buildings collapsing on civilian populations, on children, killing them in their home, slowly suffocating and crushing them, not having a quick death, but a low, long, and slow, painful death for these children. And this type of stuff, again, isn't getting headlines. There are articles that exist talking about this attack in the Western press. There is not a lot of primetime coverage as the American people are home, sitting with their families, eating their TV dinners in front of their TV sets. There's not a lot of time dedicated for this there. In fact, I didn't see any time when I was circling through the channels. So this type of thing is record-breaking. This type of thing is devastating. This type of thing is brutal in the way that it kills people. Not fast, but slow, crushing, suffocating the dust of your former home, suffocating next to the corpses of your parents. And it gets barely any coverage. I remember seeing some commentary from Mr. Beast, the YouTuber, and he said he believes in the, I think he called it the purple elephant rule, or it was pink, it was some sort of colored elephant rule. And the idea is you got to show people, if you want them to stop and you want them to listen and you want them to remember, you got to show them something that they haven't seen before. That's how you get them to engage with it. And so is this just a question of Ukrainians getting bombed is so common that it is no longer profitable for these news companies to make it a headline and present it to the American public to remind them of what is going on? Because sometimes when I get asked by Americans, they're like, oh, what's going on over there? Oh, the bombing's still going on. Oh, this is still going on. They genuinely don't know, because if they do not see it in their life, it is not happening. Sadly, a lot of people function in that way, that if they don't see it, then it doesn't exist. And so, considering how deadly this is, considering how devastating this is, considering how America's foreign policy is directly implicated here, considering that America's commitments is directly implicated here, and considering that the vast majority of the American people, we're talking like roughly 70%, support Ukraine and want to give Ukraine assistance, This type of stuff deserves mainstream coverage. It deserves a headline. It deserves to be on the first few pages of the newspaper. It deserves to be in primetime news coverage. It deserves to be shared along social media and going viral. But because it is not original enough, because it is not a purple elephant, because the corpses are not dressed in a way that will drag your attention. They're not in some sort of Mardi Gras outfit or Halloween costume or painted purple. The corpses get ignored. And, you know, I remember I read this comment recently on, I think it had to do with my lead poisoning documentary. And of course, this isn't completely one-to-one here, but it said something along the lines of like, you know, some of this is just kind of raw footage of this testimony, of this interview stuff. It's just not interesting. So I like clicked off, and it's like, okay, I understand that it wasn't interesting to you in that moment, that maybe that wasn't flashy enough, but should I have painted children who were poisoned by lead purple? And I guess this is the dilemma I find myself in, where how do I make this entertaining enough for Westerners to pay attention? Do I need to juggle in front of the corpses? Do I need to do backflips? Do I need to add film filters? Do I need to have cutaway gags? Do I need to run it like a reality TV show, like we're doing Flavor of Love or something? I refuse to, because I don't want to, number one, degrade myself and degrade the seriousness and the coldness of either children being poisoned by lead or children being crushed in their home by missiles. That's why in my next Odessa documentary, it ends with just a cold minute of footage of a civilian apartment block burning after a Russian air attack. No commentary, nothing, just cold footage. Because I think that the important and brutal and vulgar nature of this footage, this type of imagery, in and of itself says so much that to do anything else is to drown out that truth, is to drown out the image, is to drown out the suffering with bells and whistles that might derive attention, but do not derive understanding. Do not derive, I think, the complexity of emotions that it should. Thank you for the $5, Papa Keel, for your new reality show. Well, you know what? I'll use that to buy a unicycle to go back and forth with when I talk about chemical weapons attacks on the Ukrainian front line. And I'll juggle when talking about the human safari as well as being on the unicycle in order to emphasize the amount I give a shit. Anyway, I wanted to make sure that it got the proper coverage because I think it deserves it. Speaking, by the way, of brutal attacks, here is Chef Jose Andres, who is, of course, very famous for his World Kitchen initiative in order to bring food to people who are suffering in war zones and displaced areas. That was with United Nations vehicles that represent the United Nations. They were operating near the front line in Kherson. And when I say the front line, they're separated by the river. So it's not like there was an infantry assault and they mistake this vehicle for something that was transporting troops to an assault group or something. In Kherson, what separates Russian and Ukrainian positions is the Dnieper River. So this was aid vehicles operating in the city trying to give people assistance that were directly targeted. Today's attack on humanitarian workers are war crimes. The world cannot accept this as normal. Too many aid workers have died like this around the world. Russia is a permanent member of the UN Security Council, but it attacks UN and WCK vehicles in Kherson, Ukraine. While aid workers survived unharmed, one resident died. This war needs an end now. The suffering needs to end now. We are an American-based NGO at Real Donald Trump, at FLOTUS, at Secretary Rubio, hashtag Chefs for Ukraine. When I was in Kherson, I've seen grandmothers splattered on the pavement after their morning walks. I've seen the after damage at markets. I've seen destroyed ambulance vehicles. I've seen the type of shrapnel anti-personnel bombs that they attach to this, where they put nails and ball bearings and screws and whatever they can, whatever jagged piece of metal they can put into a cylinder, pack with explosives, and throw at the civilian population. I have seen too much and heard too much. Degloving head injury isn't something I even thought about before I went to Kherson, and I had that described to me about the type of injuries ambulance drivers suffered as they were double tapped when they went to go help civilians that were struck. And it's not just ambulance drivers, it's all type of city workers. One example would be firefighters who go to try to put out the fires, try to stop the spread of fire through civilian neighborhoods, and also get struck. Does that get coverage? Every once in a while, the human safari, just due to its nature, due to the fact that there are civilians being hunted, that the slaughter is completely indiscriminate. And as of last year, we had a report from the United Nations saying that this is a crime against humanity. It gets some more coverage, but still not enough. And again, this is not just a failure of mainstream press. This is a failure of alternative press. Your favorite streamer is not talking about this. Your favorite blogger or Substacker or long tweet poster or blue skyer or knuckle dragging Neanderthal misinformation spreader, they are not talking about this. They are talking about something else. Now, I'm not saying that they need to focus on this and only focus on this, but they should give it mention. That the war hasn't stopped just because you're looking away, that the war is only intensified in its brutality, and the brutality has been industrialized and expanded to a scale that nobody before this war began could have ever foreseen. And it deserves the coverage. And when I hear critiques of mainstream media not covering things for profit, if you are alternative media and you're not covering it because you're not getting the views that associate with that, you're no better than the same flaws of the mainstream press that want to put defense company ads and Pampers ads between their news segments about human suffering. You're no different. You're just chasing views. You're not chasing the story. Sorry. But you're my favorite streamer, Dylan? Wrong. Make someone else your favorite streamer so my critique still makes sense. Please. Well, that's the first story of the day. It started on a jolly note.